This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And make sure to order Jamie Glazov's new critically acclaimed jihadist psychopath, How He Is Charming, Seducing, and Devouring Us. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, behind the mask of Black Lives Matter. With us this evening, Daniel Greenfield, a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the editor of the blog The Point at frontpagemag.com. Daniel, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, look, you're the expert on these matters, especially in terms of these utopian revolutions and how they camouflage themselves. Daniel, we see right in front of our eyes these riots, these protests, this revolution occurring right before our eyes. And we know that Black Lives Matter, hashtag Black Lives Matter, because we all know that Black Lives Matter, like everybody's life matters, right? But the hashtag Black Lives Matter is not really about Black Lives Mattering. And look, you can go to Discover the Networks and look up the profile of Black Lives Matter and learn all kinds of things about this organization. But you even go to their page, start reading their mission statement. You know, all of a sudden there's this stuff about trans and the attack on the nuclear family and homosexuality. And what's going on here? What is really behind this movement?
Well, as David Horowitz likes to say very simply, it's always about the revolution. Black Lives Matter is very much just about the revolution. It's always about the revolution. Now, interestingly enough, after the riots in LA, which affected the Jewish community here, there were some Jewish leaders who reached out to me and asked me for what I knew about Black Lives Matter. And they'd had trouble reaching out or getting any contacts in Black Lives Matter through their usual contacts in the Black community, because really the Black Lives Matter leadership has often very little overlap with traditional figures within the Black community, because they really did not come out of the Black community. When you have a movement that claims to represent Black people talking about gay and trans and destroying the nuclear family, you know, Black people are overall more religious than white people in the country today. That's not coming out of the Black community. That's coming very much out of the campus intersectionality movements. It's coming out of the activist circles. And you have Patrice Clores, others saying that we are trained Marxists. These people are radical leftists. And really, if you go back through the history of American race riots, going back really as much as a century, a lot of these riots really weren't acted the same way. Back then, you didn't have Antifa. You had communist party groups. Those white communists would kind of push their Black allies to carry out some of these riots. It would be really much the same thing. It's this combination of really hardcore white radicals. When we say radicals, we are talking Marxists and communists, who would perpetrate these riots for their own political gain. And that's exactly what's going on here. It's not about racism. It's not about police brutality. There was actually a recent survey which found that only 7% of Black people are really dissatisfied with their local police department. I mean, the country's being burned down. Every single corporation is sending out emails of concern. Politicians are holding hearings and drafting legislation and declaring racism a public crisis. Meanwhile, again, only 7% of Black people, when they look at their local police department and go, there's something really bad about this local police department.
Right. Daniel, when one does their research into hashtag Black Lives Matter, all of a sudden you begin to see the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, and you know, we see CARE very much involved and allied, and so something is not right here. You know, the co-founder, Patrice Cullors, for instance, in 2015, a 10-day trip to the Palestinian territories in the West Bank. Very interesting. What was she doing there? Who was she meeting with people there? In August 2015, we know that she signed a petition with 1,000 other activists and scholars and politicians. This petition proclaimed, quote unquote, solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. And there was a commitment in that petition to the, quote unquote, liberation of Palestinian land and the Palestinian people, etc. Now, we know that this liberation, quote unquote, is of course a masquerade, and really what it means is the genocide of the Israeli people. You can correct me if I'm wrong. How does any of this have to do, what does any of this have to do with Black Lives Mattering?
Well, it's the same setup that you, again, have had in American leftist politics, particularly in Marxist politics, which is that they would have multiple front groups, and there would be one front group that would target Black people, another that might target Jews, another that might target Italian immigrants. There would be artists against the war, and workers against the war, and mothers against the war. And once you actually go behind the scenes, it would just be one hand pulling the strings. That's exactly what this is here. So I mentioned that Black Lives Matter does not have much in the way of roots in the Black community. It comes out of intersectionality. Intersectionality really fuses a lot of these various political organizations together and makes them interchangeable. So, of course, it's all going to be the trans cause and the Black cause and the Islamic terrorist cause and the feminist cause, and all of them are going to be tied together. And behind the scenes, they're interchangeable. Thus, behind Black Lives Matter, you're going to see Ford Foundation, which was their financial partner. You're going to see Act Blue, which is the Democrat nonprofit that raises money for left-wing candidates. You're going to see George Soros, of course, and you're going to see the same hands behind, of course, the various Islamic groups which are integrated into the American left. Islamic groups, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood, you've written quite extensively about the Red Green Alliance, made the decision to really integrate into the left. Al Jazeera, for example, which is the really the voice of the Muslim Brotherhood backed by Qatar, largely pushes left-wing politics despite the fact that its own politics are exactly the opposite. So you have this integration between the Red-Green Alliance, and everything else is just a facade. So you're going to have Black Lives Matter, which claims to be a Black group, and of course you've got Sean King, who's suspiciously white, but that doesn't matter. And you've got Linda Sarsour, who claims to be a person of color, though, as you pointed out, without the hijab. She would easily be mistaken for a white person. The only color there is the hijab. But again, this whole thing is entirely a construct. It's there to create this idea that we're now going to be having all these massive rallies over Black Lives Matter. A few months ago, before the pandemic, we were having these massive rallies over the environment. A few months from now, they'll be doing massive rallies over something else. It's the same network, and they just have different figures up on front of the stage.
Okay, Daniel, but no real but there. If you're dancing with hashtag Black Lives Matter, you are dancing with Jew haters and with an organization that is also committed to the extinction of Israel, correct?
Yeah, absolutely no question about it. Again, the left has climbed into bed with the Muslim Brotherhood, with the Islamist groups, and what those groups want, obviously, is the destruction of Israel, the death of all the Jews in there, the subjugation of the Christians, which, as we've seen, has really decimated Christian populations throughout the Middle East. And obviously beyond that, because they're not just going to stop in Israel, they want to once again take back Egypt. They want to take control again in some of the other areas where the Muslim Brotherhood won and was forced out. And beyond that, of course, they want to take Europe and they want to take America. So they're making a deal with the devil in the worst possible way. They're making a deal with people who hate and want to kill Christians, who hate and want to kill Jews. And they have absolutely no apologetics in that regard. And we mentioned previously that the statue demolition was redolent of the Taliban. Well, this is they are in bed with the Taliban. They're in bed with allies of the Taliban.
Daniel, I'm also interested in Planned Parenthood, and I think an argument could be made that it's the number one or maybe number two killer of Black lives. We know who Margaret Sanger was. We know why she created Planned Parenthood. We know what Planned Parenthood is doing to unborn Black babies, and it was designed to do that. How can Black people in any good conscience be interconnected with the left if the left and Planned Parenthood are so close together and interlinked? Could you speak on that?
Well, what people know, what Black people, what white people know, mostly comes from media, which is a major problem because the media reports certain facts, it omits others. And now that social media has been getting the word out, has been breaking through, there is a very intensive push now to censor social media, to force conservatives off Twitter, off Facebook. Facebook is now facing a huge ad boycott unless it gives in and censors conservatives. So Black people in many cases really do not know. Those who find out are quite disturbed by it. Because that is part of the reality. The left has manipulated the Black community and enlisted many members of the Black community into participating in their own destruction, their own genocide, just as it enlists Jews into supporting people who kill Jews, just as it enlists any number of white people into policies that destroy them. What the left does, it's a poison chalice. It's a cult of death. It always kills those who support it. It does so in various ways. It does so in different ways, but it always kills.
Daniel, one could make the argument that Black Lives Matter also inspires terrorism. That's one way of putting it. But there's a terrorist link. But we do know, I mean, you just have to go to discoverthenetworks.org and look at the profile of Black Lives Matter in terms of the documented section on what BLM rhetoric alone has inspired in terms of attacks on police officers, in terms of murders, not just of police, but of Black people, of American citizens. What would you say about this in terms of what the Black Lives Matter rhetoric itself has inspired throughout the country?
At one point, they tried to actually track the number of police officers who had been injured, law enforcement officers who had been injured in these riots, and the number easily passed 500. At this point, I've long since given up. Those are war numbers, and in fact, we are at war. While the media keeps telling us these are peaceful protests that suddenly, somehow, unexpectedly turned violent, in fact, this is a war. This is, as its founders repeatedly said, a revolution against America. They're waging a low-intensity conflict. They're waging a terror campaign. They're trying to actively seize particular pieces of territory and use them as bases. So there's absolutely no ambiguity about that whatsoever, except among the media. These are not peaceful protests. This is a campaign against America, and it's enacting a growing toll. And it's enacting a toll in various ways. So among those ways, for example, is the upsurge in gun violence in urban areas. You have 3 children being killed alone in Chicago. You have an upsurge in gun violence in New York and in cities where these riots have been going on across the country. And we know in the past, after the Freddie Gray riots in Baltimore, just how much the death rate among Black men shot up.
So in other words, hashtag Black Lives Matter leads to the murder and killing of many Black people. And if we get rid, for instance, of the police, we know that Black lives will very much suffer because of that, correct?
We are seeing that effect already. We saw that with the original Ferguson effect, where police became less responsive to calls in Baltimore. Now, Black residents are protesting and saying that they actually need more police to be on the street. They don't want to dismantle the police. Very few Black people actually want to dismantle the police. They actually need more of a police presence. When you actually have crime and violence in your neighborhood, the last thing you want is for the police to go away. The people who are most enthusiastic about the police going away are living in privileged, very nice areas. And to them, this is just an abstract slogan that has no real meaning to their lives until they actually encounter it.
When you take off the mask of Black Lives Matter, Daniel, in conclusion, what do we see?
We see the same old face underneath. It's the face of Lenin, it's the face of Stalin, it's the face of Castro, it's the face of Mao. It's the face of the radical left underneath that wants a radical evolution in America. They use identity politics. The left in America particularly loves using identity politics to divide and conquer. They're trying to pit Americans against each other. First, they started to pit Americans against each other around class, then around race, and around gender, and around sexual orientation, around a dozen other things. But their goal is always to pit Americans against each other because they want to conquer America.
Daniel Greenfield, thank you so much for your wisdom and your courage.
Thank you so much for continuing to speak out, Jamie.
And thank you as well, and we'll see you soon, Daniel. Everybody, please read Daniel Greenfield at Front Page Magazine. And he has a blog at Front Page Magazine as well called The Point. Read it every day. And also don't forget to watch the Glazov Gang. We'll see you soon. Good night.